Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Turning Towards Life with Justin Wise and Lizzie Wynn. We want to warmly welcome you this morning. It's 9 a.m. on Sunday as usual. And just to mention that if you wanted to watch any of our other videos, you can find them sometimes right up here in the Facebook feed. But also we have our own YouTube channel, which is if you search for Turning Towards Life in YouTube. And we also have a website with every video that we've done, we've posted there. And it's the address is www.turningtowards.life. So if you'd like to find out more and also find out more about Third Space, which is the partnership that Justin and I have with some other wonderful people, you can go to our website, which is thirdspacecoaching.com. So welcome to today. We are going to be reading a beautiful poem written by my sister today and having a conversation about that. The cool thing is that I actually briefed this poem in. This doesn't exist because of anything other than me saying, right, Holly, I need you to write a poem, and I think it needs to be for Turning Towards Life, and I want us to talk about it. So she wrote me and said, oh, here we are, I think I've done it and I'm not sure and I don't know. And I said, oh my God, this is perfect and amazing. Thank you so much. So I just want to say thank you to Holly already for this beautifulness that she has brought to us for this today, for this Turning Towards Life.
Thank you, Lizzie. Well, good morning, everyone. This will make very little sense to people who are listening in or watching it afterwards, but I'm unreasonably excited because Facebook Live is working again after a few weeks of interruptions. We're actually live when we said we would be, which to me feels wonderful. Lizzie will know this because we were away together with a group of very dear friends and colleagues who are all involved in teaching the kind of coaching that we teach. So we were away in Tuscany last week. And I was explaining to someone about what we're doing here and what the intent of it is. And I realized that very big part of it is, and Lizzie, you'll know this, that this is completely live. This is unrehearsed, unscripted. And I think this might turn out to be relevant to today. And what we might end up talking about is, I know that this came to us doing this because of our observation about how much comes through in relationship, that when we're willing to be in relationship with other people and to develop the kind of trust and openness, and some people would call it vulnerability and availability and contactfulness that's possible between people, something else can come through. And so this whole Turning Towards Life project is a project in allowing something to come through. So it's exciting to be live in this way, in a way that people can actually find us this morning, even if you're watching or listening later. And I'm excited to see what happens from this wonderful piece from Holly.
So I'm going to read, and then Justin, will you read after me?
Of course.
Okay. So this is the journey of the wildflower. So if you are listening, maybe take a deep breath and sense into however you're sitting, or maybe you're walking, maybe you're even driving. But just take a minute to sense into where you are and take a breath, maybe a little bit deeper than you would normally take as a breath. And see how this poem might impress upon you, how it might land in you. So this morning, I was stopped in my tracks by the simple, exquisite beauty of a violet-petaled flower who had burst her way into bloom out of a crack in a concrete wall. I wondered why I was so moved by her, why I felt such deep and instant friendship. And I realized that she was beaming me with the truth that all growth starts in darkness, that all beginnings are seemingly hopeless, that it is impossible to imagine the violet of a future petal when all you know is the darkness and hardness of the unknown. And that this is how it is for us. when we are asked repeatedly by life to turn towards the pain, the sacredness, the beauty, the grief, the constant endings, as well as the constant beginnings, without knowing how or why, or even if we can bear any of it at all. But here she was, blooming at me, telling me with every cell to keep turning towards the fire of the sun, to keep risking it, to keep my petals open, to know beyond the hardness of the concrete who I really am. Sometimes it happens like this, you see. A wildflower invites me all the way home, and I follow her.
My goodness, there really is something to hear that, Lizzie. So I'm going to read it too. The journey of the wild flower. This morning, I was stopped in my tracks by the simple, exquisite beauty of a violet-petaled flower who had burst her way into bloom out of a crack in a concrete wall. I wondered why I was so moved by her, why I felt such deep and instant friendship, and I realized that she was beaming me with the truth that all growth starts in darkness, that all beginnings are seemingly hopeless, that it is impossible to imagine the violet of a future petal when all you know is the darkness and hardness of the unknown. And that this is how it is for us when we are asked repeatedly by life to turn towards the pain, the sacredness, the beauty, the grief, the constant endings, as well as the constant beginnings, without knowing how or why, or even if we can bear any of it at all. But here she was, blooming at me, telling me with every cell to keep turning towards the fire of the sun, to keep risking it, to keep my petals open, to know beyond the hardness of the concrete who I really am. Sometimes it happens like this, you see. A wildflower invites me all the way home, and I follow her.
I'm so appreciating the way that this brings such strong imagery to me. I feel like I can see the crack and I can see the little flower. And because I know Holly, I can kind of see her standing there with the flower and the transmission. I can feel the transmission between the flower and my sister. And it feels like a deep validation of all of the darkness that I experience and have experienced, and an invitation to feeling the faithfulness to that, the faith that when it is dark and hard, like the concrete, that it is how things begin. And just to know that simple thing is, and to have it so beautifully laid out like this, in such a straightforward, poetic, ordinary, grounded, earthy way, is, it's like an example of all it takes is just somebody saying some things, and then some place becomes okay, rather than somewhere to avoid or somewhere to be fearful of. And in this moment, I'm just really grateful for that, and for the feel of that faithfulness of the beginnings and the endings and the darkness.
such a relief, isn't it, Lizzie, to I think to be reminded of how unhelpful so many of our stories are about what's happening, and that there are other stories that we might tell that can help us. And the one, there's so much happening for me as I read and as I heard you read, but one of the things that was happening for me was catching on a glimpse again of a narrative about life that's really easy for me to be in, and I find myself thrown into again and again and again, which is part one of it is, this shouldn't be happening, whatever it is. This is not how it's meant to be. And then part two, which makes it way worse, is I did something wrong to be here. And the setup in both of these, well, there's so much suffering that comes from this, both of these parts of this narrative. And what a reminder of, the thing I love about the way Holly's written this is, it seems to me that she's pointing very directly into something that when we stop for long enough and really let ourselves look at life, we can see, which is, there's no knowing what's going to happen. Most of it is way, way beyond our ability to influence. And we never know what we're in when we're in it. Not really. We often don't know what we were in after it either. You know, I'm not saying that we land at some all-knowing vantage point, oh, now my whole life makes sense looking back. But it really seems true to me that when I'm in, as I often experience, darkness, confusion, I didn't choose this. This came. To remember the simple truth that there are always beginnings in darkness, even when there are endings. Even when there are endings for us, there are also always beginnings. And that life is always beginnings and endings. And I think that's the part that really hit me, which is, I am anyway, I suspect most of us are so quick to label something as a beginning or as an ending, and we don't know. And you see, because we don't know, all the stories that we tell about what's happening in that moment are usually off. So let's have some stories that are truthful and opening of possibility of us being in life rather than running away from it.
Yeah. And I'm appreciating Holly's language as well, of the turning towards those places that you're talking about. You know, this thing that we're doing together, Justin, we're calling turning towards life. And for me, the opposite of that is turning away from life. But implicit in it is that life is always what life is. And we either become aligned with what life is having us experience and we turn into it, or we try and deny it or push it away or name it as something unhelpful. Like you just said, like having a story about it that diminishes us or excludes us somehow. And turning towards feels like, how do I include this and welcome this, whatever this is, so that I do keep risking it and staying, I think you used the word vulnerable, like being vulnerable to life, being affected by it, in it, whatever it might look like. And, you know, I experience a lot, I think this thing Halls is talking about when she talks about keeping on risking it and to keep the petals open. And so many times it feels just like, oh my gosh, I just want to run, or I want to hide, or I want to be in denial. And I may do those things. But what I experience this poem as a call to take the invitation that's always there to step back in and to risk what it means to tell the truth, to risk what it means to acknowledge something really painful and be in it. Because if what's there might be a source of learning and a source of growth, which actually in my experience, whenever I turn towards, that's what's there, which is how come in a way I'm faithful to this project, is because whenever I do that, something different comes than what my habitual personality response, I suppose, has kind of ordinarily been in history. And I'm learning more and more to let life be right here, and not to be holding it at bay or running away or hiding, but keeping inside of the encounter that is the process that I am in my unfolding, and also other people too. So I'm taking this as a big invitation to follow, as Hol says, to follow the wisdom of turning towards, and being courageous enough to know that the pain is okay to be in, and what comes forth, the possibilities by facing in, are unknown, and we can have faith that there will be something life-giving that arises from it by turning towards it rather than turning away from it.
The funny thing about this struck me as you were talking, Lizzie, is that you can't actually turn away from life.
Yeah.
And so, because even to speak that way is to, it's a useful way of speaking. Of course, you know, we're really committed to talking this way about this project as well, but it showed me, I think, the trap that we get into, which is to go, there's life and there's me, and we're separate from one another. And there's some way in which I can turn away and then life won't affect me anymore. But as long as we're living, that's actually an impossible move. It's a totally fictional move. And it's the taking the fictional move, in fact, that brings us into such difficulty. And it also, if you sort of think about it, even a little way beyond the sort of initial premise, it relies on all kinds of things. Like, we have to have the power of a supreme being to have that happen. Oh, somehow I can separate myself from life and not be affected by it. Or somehow if I tell myself the right thing in my head, it'll go my way. So that's one of the problems. And I think Holly's poem does this so beautifully by starting with the experience of a flower, of reminding us that what's happening is that life is arising everywhere all the time. And it's arising through us, and it's arising through flowers growing out of a wall, and it's arising through trees, and it's arising through relationships, through people. It's also arising in all the things that human beings make. Buildings and money and aircraft and technology. And this is what's going on, is life is arising through all of this endlessly. And I think that, and I suppose I feel really deeply, if I get soft enough and I'm willing to give up on my stories about my own inadequacy and my own brokenness and how it's all my fault or someone else's fault, when I let all of that fall away and soften enough, I can sometimes get a glimpse that what I am also, this something that I take to be me, that's so familiar to me, is also just another way that life is arising and coming through. So none of us can turn away from that. But to the extent that we imagine we can, is what makes every experience so much more difficult to bear.
Yeah.
So pain is going to come through, and confusion is going to come through, and darkness is going to come through, and grief and joy. And I'm wanting to say it really clearly this way. It felt important for me to bring this into our conversation because almost everything else that most of us encounter in our lives keeps the story of our separateness going.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not even a narrative that any of us get unless we choose to come into its path, or we open to it ourselves through some experiences that we have. We don't get people reminding us in the way that Holly's reminding us that we and the wildflower are really not so different to one another. Which is exactly her point, right? It's not just a metaphor, it's a beautiful metaphor, but that's not all it is.
Mm. Yeah. And also, Justin, you're reminding me of the humanity of our project. Because of course there's the underlying spiritual reality that whether or not we're turning towards or turning away, life is life, which we can't be separate from. But I think it's true to say that there are mechanisms in our personalities that do turn away. We think we can. And I'm so glad that we are grounded in that way. Like our project is grounded in the fact that, of course, there's these deeper spiritual truths that we see more and more, and that this is a project of compassion to the condition that we're in. And I'm so grateful for that, because of course there's been times in my life where there have been kind of absolute realities around spirituality and enlightenment and all that kind of thing that come forth, and they forget to acknowledge the really basic human stuff of what the ordinary day-to-dayness, as if we're not supposed to be in some way. So in a way, that's a turning away from life too, ironically. I'm just in a moment of appreciation of the normalness of our conversation, and the embracing of the deeper and the shallower all at once, as in the acknowledgement of that deep reality that life cannot be turned away from anyway, and cannot be turned towards, arguably. But in our experience, in my experience for sure, I can find pockets of things I've put away that when I bring them back into my consciousness, I bring them to an aliveness that's willing and open and faithful to face them. Something different happens than them just staying in the pocket that I've put them in my constructs, if you like. So and I think this is what this poem is. It's like an invitation to acknowledge where we feel separate, and not pretend that we don't for some spiritual something, but to actually just be real with ourselves and to say, yeah, I do that. I really do that. You know, when I'm in pain, I really think it's the end of the world, and I don't know if I'm going to get through this. And then we do all kinds of things to pretend it's not there, or to magnify it, or to dramatize it, or, you know, whatever our structures are that are habitually in response to difficulty. And this really beautiful and simple acknowledgement of, like, really of pain. I mean, I had this last week, I really, really felt a very, very deep pain. And I drew on my sister, drew on the people who love me. And I sat with something really, really hard. And I cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. And I was on my own, and there were some bushes. And so I let the bushes be my friends. And I faced into something which felt like it was never going to end. it felt like everything was really royally ruined. It felt like I was the one who'd ruined it. It felt like it was all wrong. You know, there were so many like really horrible things that kept kind of piling on and piling on. And I drew on all the people who I trust to be just connect with my faith that I can be there, I can be here. And I'm not gonna, like, sometimes I think I might like disintegrate or something, or disappear because it hurts so much. And I think this is why I kind of had this poem in mind as well, in a way, because Holes wrote this for me a couple of weeks ago. And this is really what happened, like on Friday for me, is that I turned towards this pain and this grief, and I let it be there in its fullest expression that I could handle, that I could manifest, that I could help to be here. And it seems like so much difficulty is born of not allowing pain to be pain. And I'm so grateful for Holes, because I think this is one of the gifts that she brings me, certainly in my life, and I think to many others. You know, she has this lovely group called Presence of Love, which is a study of a text called A Course in Miracles, and it's on Facebook. And she allows people to face into this by facing into it herself, and many other things too. But this, I think, is one of the threads of beauty around her work in the world and her personness in this lifetime, is keeping her petals open, no matter how many times they close and she retreats or it feels difficult. It's like there's deep faith in the gift of this. And it's kind of even how come she sees that flower in the wall. You know, most people would just walk past it. And there's a teensy little flower coming through a crack in concrete in London somewhere. And I'm so grateful to have someone who welcomes that and doesn't push it away, so that when it comes to me, I've got like an anchor into the okayness of it, and a teacher specifically in that.
Seems to me that the invitation that Holly's making here, Lizzie, to pay attention to beauty in the world is part of the necessary path of this. So I'm so with you. I'm really grateful for you for talking about the experience that you've been having this week, and you're pointing out that there's a way that's so easy for any of us to go, which is, particularly if we get ourselves into big questions about spirituality or the nature of life or any of those kind of things, to imagine that what is called for is some kind of leap. I'll leap over all of the suffering and somehow I'll be an enlightened person, and that will mean I'll see the truth about things and nothing will affect me. Which, as far as I can tell from watching people and from my own experience, is completely the opposite of what's called for. And so one of the practices that we can take up is seeing what we can do to be open at first to beauty that's everywhere, because what beauty can remind us of, and I don't just mean obvious kinds of beauty, I mean the darkness from which the flower is growing, or the beauty of for some reason I've got very into washing dishes. I really enjoy washing dishes, like the beauty of warm water and the feel of a plate, and or the beauty of something that's broken, or the beauty of our own difficulty, none of which is to make our difficulty not into difficulty. I mean, there's always a trap in talking about this, because it might sound like, well, this will just make pain okay. No, pain is pain.
Mhm.
Hurt is hurt, suffering is suffering, confusion is confusion. But opening ourselves to beauty can be a path to opening ourselves, allowing ourselves to be open so that what's here can be here.
Mm.
Even if we need to take action to change it, the first place is, this is what's here.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about this some other time. I have a thing that I think I want to bring to a future week, something I wrote. And I may have said this before in this conversation, but when I got briefly very ill a few years ago, one of the things I know that was going on in the background was a profound kind of denial on my part of what was actually happening, both before what happened and whilst it was happening.
Mm.
And one of the things I came to learn from that is I think our bodies are really deeply sensitive to our truthfulness.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're
Mm-hmm.
engaged in not being truthful with ourselves and not being truthful with other people, let's just even start with, can I be truthful with myself about what's actually happening here? Everything it takes for us not to be truthful is some kind of huge, it either calls on so much in our bodies or it's some huge disruption that it doesn't surprise me that we get sick, that we get, all kinds of things happen. So truth is a tricky subject, and there's lots of different ways of talking about truth, but the truth that you were talking about, Lizzie, of crying into a bush, being with the bushes, and the truth of here's what's happening and this is what's happening and I'm here in the midst of it, that seems to me, however hard it is the most important move we can make, and it's also what allows us to be kind to other people as well as to ourselves. It's what allows us to be a support to other people have their own life go through.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking, in order to be able to tell the truth, a lot of the time we have to feel safe that the truth will be welcome if it got said. And the kind of relationship and community that my life feels very drawn to creating is the kind of places where whatever your truth is welcome. And that whatever system we're in, whether it's a relationship of two people or a group or a community, to be in a place where that safety, psychological safety, is cultivated, that your truth is allowed to be here. And to create spaces and places and means for that safe place to be an affordance for the revealing of truth, to be an invitation for the revealing of truth in and of itself, feels like partly what this is as well. And I know that exists between us, is that I feel like we can tell each other the truth and we'll be interested in it rather than try and push it away or tell each other that we're being ridiculous or something. It's like, that's the kind of relationship that I think affords us to live in a way that feels truthful, as you're saying. Like, not that we have to be aligned with some truth, but in the moment being allowed to and invited to be honest about our experience and what that is, and trusting that gives birth to our unfolding.
Yes. Just to be able to say, I'm hurt, I'm afraid, I'm confused, I'm angry with you, I'm angry with me. So that's why one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative of this pair of lines that Holly's written, to keep turning towards the fire of the sun.
Yeah.
Because, looking at the sun is really hard. And we never want to look directly at the sun. The sun is warming us all the time, but it's also so bright that we can't look.
Yeah.
So I'm not about here to make a suggestion that any of us go and burn our retinas out by staring at the sun. I think that so beautifully expresses this dynamic, which is that we often don't want to look at what's here. That's the turning away move that we've been talking about. We don't want to be in contact with what's here. But just like the sun, every single thing that is happening on this planet that is to do with a living something, and almost all the other things that are happening that aren't to do with living things, got powered by the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Our ability to talk and move and think and relate is all sun power, solar power.
Yeah.
So there's something very profound and wise in the way that Holly has called us to turn towards the sun. Exactly that which we are afraid of turning directly into, but will also fuel us and fire us and enliven us.
Yes.
So we have reached our time and some.
Yeah.
It's an unusual experience for us to have actually managed to have started exactly when we planned to. So yes,
we did it.
So I want to say thank you to everyone for being with us, and thank you from me to you, Lizzie, for being in this conversation. And to remind all of you that we're live every Sunday on Facebook, 9 o'clock in the morning. We're at turningtowards.life. We're at thirdspacecoaching.com. We're in lots of other ways to find us, and we will so look forward to being with you next week.
Thanks everybody for listening, and thank you to Holly for this gorgeous gift
she's
given us in this poem.
Bye everyone.
Bye.